I'm eating beef noodle soup, Taiwan's national dish, but another country claims it, and I think you know who. So what makes this dish Taiwanese? This is Taiwan, a country you're not supposed to call a country. By now we all know why. But regardless of the geopolitical drama, Taiwan operates as a country, with its own economy, own government, its own trade deals with other countries. But what about Taiwan's cuisine? Is it uniquely and independently Taiwanese? Food in Taiwan is historically tied to China and Japan. Over 95% of the population here is of Han Chinese descent, dwarfing the island's indigenous 2%. Another thing to note is that Taiwan not only considers itself to be an independent country, it technically considers itself to be the real China, the Republic of China, or ROC. Officially, to the ROC, the People's Republic of China is an illegitimate government ruling the mainland that belongs to the Taiwanese government. And this claim has put the cuisine of this island in a weird spot. If Taiwan claims to be China, then the food here would technically be Chinese. But the people here no longer expect Taiwan to replace this. Instead, they're separating their culture and food from being Chinese. They're becoming Taiwanese. I want to see what this looks like on the ground, how Taiwan is separating its cuisine and culture from China. To find that out, I'm going to be eating a lot of food here. And by trying all of this food, I want to see if we can put together an image to what is Taiwanese cuisine.
The issue with Taiwan is not one that China is willing to compromise on.
台湾人民用行动成功抵御外部势力的介入。
I'm in Keelung, heading to one of the largest night markets in the country. Night markets are a part of the cultural identity of Taiwan, but the food served at these markets just shows how hard it is to decipher Taiwanese cuisine. Alright, so we're gonna try this dumpling that looks like it's inspired by Chinese dim sum. I actually have no idea what this thing is. Something very unique. I've never seen this before. Wow, that's delicious. Holy, it's very floral. It doesn't look floral, but it's really amazing. Whoa, I just found a place that serves takoyaki. I've never had takoyaki in Taiwan. I don't know if it's any different. The consistency of how it's fried is different. It's softer. The skin is thinner than it is in Japan, and it's sweeter than in Japan, which is interesting. This place serves roast duck burritos, but it looks like Peking duck, so I'm kind of curious to see if there's any difference to it. It's like Peking duck, but it's also not. The sauce is different, and the vegetables put into it also are slightly different than what you would normally find in Peking duck. So as you can see, the food here, it's like very heavily influenced by Japan and China. Yet even if it takes dishes from those countries, it's now become like very Taiwanese. Like the flavors are so different than what you would get in mainland China and in Japan. And it's just like Taiwanese food now. In order for me to continue and for this story to make sense, I need to give you a bit of context. Context on Taiwan's history, and how a lot of people have fought over this place for years. This version of Taiwan has only really been around for about 70 years. In the beginning, the people who lived on this island weren't even Chinese. It was the native people of Taiwan. And there are a lot of different indigenous groups among the native population here. Genetically, they're actually a lot closer to Southeast Asians and Pacific Islanders than to East Asians like me. Their story and food is fascinating, and I didn't have enough time in Taiwan to cover it, but I'd love to next time. But right now, we need to talk about China. In the 1600s, the Qing dynasty of China took control of this island. But the Emperor of China didn't actually want Han Chinese people to migrate here. They were afraid of the indigenous Taiwanese people rebelling. You see, this island was just under the control of the Dutch a few years earlier, so the idea of being colonized by another big empire didn't sit very well with the native Taiwanese. But there wasn't much the emperor could really do to stop people. and eventually enough Chinese people moved here to become the majority of Taiwan. Indigenous people were subsequently pushed into the mountains and the less fertile east coast. Eventually, the Qing dynasty grew pretty weak and lost control of the island, and the people who lived here, who were mostly Han Chinese, declared their own independent country. They used a name that the Portuguese gave this island centuries earlier, and called it the Republic of Formosa. But oh wait, 5 months after independence, Japan comes and takes the island. Taiwan was actually their first colony, beginning the Empire of Japan. This island was under Japanese control for about 50 years until the end of World War II, when Japan was forced to give up its empire. But despite all of this, Taiwan would again be taken hostage, as a civil war now raged in China, between the nationalists and the communists. The communists ultimately defeated the nationalists, making the Kuomintang retreat into Taiwan. Here, the KMT established the island under the Republic of China, and they weren't great either. They immediately placed Taiwan under martial law, restricting freedom of speech, and held the island under authoritarian rule for 38 years. Taiwan wasn't fully democratic in the way it is today until 1994, 1 year before I was born. The KMT vowed to one day take back the mainland, which was now the People's Republic of China, run by the CCP, who in turn vowed to take Taiwan by any means necessary, including invasion. But people on the ground here, despite mostly being ethnically Chinese and speaking Mandarin, are seeing themselves under a different umbrella now. They're no longer the real China or China at all. They're Taiwan. And the food here, which was brought over by the Dutch, Chinese, and Japanese, is evolving into its own Taiwanese culture. So let's go back to Taiwan and see what that looks like. Okay, back in Taipei, and I'm about to try something that is quintessentially Taiwanese: bubble tea. There's a few conflicting stories to who invented bubble tea, but it most likely comes from this shop. Apparently, this woman, the company's development manager, created bubble tea on a whim. At a meeting, she added tapioca to her milk tea, and during the meeting, she drank it and just suddenly realized that it was pretty good. She actually interrupted the meeting to encourage others in the room to drink it, and everyone fell in love with it, and it was added to the menu pretty much immediately after. Okay. I could actually drink all of this. But the origin of some dishes here is complicated. As seen again and again on this channel, tracing back the origins of certain dishes is really difficult, and it's just often speculation. In 2011, the Michelin Green Guide of Taiwan listed Rou Fan, which is a super popular dish here, to be from Shandong, China, and this caused outrage. People here who see this dish as an iconic Taiwanese dish weren't very happy. The Taipei government actually gave out 1,000 bowls of Rou Fan in response to fight the Michelin claim. But this argument is actually really old. China has for a long time claimed that Rou Fan comes from the Zhou dynasty in Shandong. But Taiwan says it came from here during Japanese occupation. Now, I'm not gonna get into who's right or wrong, because I don't know, but you can just see how contentious this all really is. And see how Taiwan wants food here to be recognized as Taiwanese.
So we use the 8-gram tea leaves. I'll put into the teapot.
Now, all of these dishes might have a contentious history, but nothing is more important to Taiwanese cuisine than this. Beef noodle soup is the national dish of Taiwan, but its history is strongly tied with China, and it's a complicated history. This noodle soup was largely inspired by Sichuan cuisine, this massive regional cuisine of China. But it also draws roots from a northern Chinese dish in Langzhou, which often gets confused with Taiwan as the same dish. Beef noodle soup was brought to Taiwan by refugees of the Kuomintang, the army that lost the Chinese Civil War to the CCP, This army fled to Taiwan and quickly realized that the culture here was very different than it was from China. This was 1949, and Taiwan had just been a Japanese colony for 50 years. And the food here represented that. Also, beef in Taiwan was historically taboo. Cows were an integral part of farming here. Now, that quickly changed during Japan's occupation, but when the Kuomintang arrived in Taiwan, they quickly found out that beef was still a relatively new thing here, meaning there weren't many beef dishes. But you have to put yourself in the shoes of these soldiers. They had just fled the country they were fighting for, their home. The KMT retreat into Taiwan was really rushed. These soldiers were not expecting to leave mainland China, and when they landed here in what is essentially a foreign land, they quickly became homesick. They missed the food they had back home in China, and they wanted to bring it to Taiwan. Oh wow, this is really good actually. It's spicier than I thought it would be. Remember, beef was a really new socially accepted concept in Taiwan at the time. Beef noodle soup didn't exist here, so the KMT soldiers recreated it using their own memories of the dish in China. Whoa, but hold on, China is massive, and its cuisine is insanely diverse, to the point each regional cuisine might as well be its own cuisine. These soldiers weren't all from the same place. They came from all around China and ate very different foods. So Taiwanese beef noodle soup incorporates flavors from across China, which ironically makes it uniquely Taiwanese. I don't even know what this is. It's sweet. I have to just interject for a moment. I have to say that I'm in love with the food of this country. Now, I've traveled to many other countries on this channel already, but I have to say that I haven't had this level of excitement with many of them. Food in Taiwan is just amazing. It is a mix of all of my other favorite cuisines, and everything is cheap, it's good, it's all served in these very authentic feeling places with this kinetic energy. It's such an amazing place. This cuisine is like a paradox. It's strongly tied to China, and for a while you could have technically called it Chinese food, just from a different China. But now it's become a very unique scene to this island, which is Taiwanese food. Obviously, the CCP doesn't want this to happen. After all, they consider Taiwan as part of China. In 2022, a Chinese foreign spokeswoman claimed that Taiwan was undoubtedly part of China, because it had a lot of Chinese restaurants. Other times, China's actions have been more aggressive, like in 2021, when they banned imports of Taiwanese pineapples. This was done in efforts to make Taiwanese farmers mad at their pro-independent government.
Beijing has suspended imports of more than 2,000 food products from Taiwan.
本来是有大陆的订单嘛，现在香港我无订单啊，所以做烦恼的，去找出路啊。
But the CCP went even further in 2022, when US Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. They banned imports from a ton of Taiwanese companies. This banning of Taiwanese imports actually showed how vulnerable Taiwan's food system really is. The country isn't very big, and it's mostly mountainous. Most of the land that's usable for farming has already been taken up by these massive, dense cities. A majority of Taiwan's food supplies comes from overseas, mostly these countries. And that's a problem. If, say, China were to put a naval blockade on the island, Taiwan would only really be able to feed itself for about 6 months. To show you one of the ways Taiwan is trying to become self-sufficient with its food supply, this is in the middle of a train station. So for countries like Taiwan, which have limited agricultural land, vertical farming or artificial farming has become a really important experiment to try to become self-sufficient with food. This is why, from Taiwan's perspective, separating its food and culture from China is so important. This country wants to be seen as a country, independent and culturally unique. And while Taiwan speaks Mandarin, its language of food here has become completely its own. The food in Taiwan speaks to the experience of this island, having been controlled by the Dutch, Chinese, and Japanese, and now finally having it for themselves. And it also speaks to the experience of being shadowed by a much more powerful neighbor next door. Food here is a Taiwanese experience, and you can't get it anywhere else in the world. I want to leave this video on a high note and celebrate the amazing culture Taiwan has to offer. From late night cafes to exploring unique dishes like oyster omelets, this country isn't just some chess piece in a Cold War that you keep on hearing about. Taiwan is one of the most beautiful countries I've been fortunate enough to visit. There is so much I want to talk about here beyond this story, but I only have so much time on these trips. And to be honest, I wanted to spend most of my time here for myself. This is a place where people live, a place where they're proud of, a place where its history has shaped it, but has yet to define it.